Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to be comparing, both for the purposes of visiting and living in, Sofia, Bulgaria to Belgrade, Serbia. Before we get started, please hit the like button super hard. Click it, click the notification bell. Appreciate you following us. Check out our other videos, and let's dive into it. Okay, so these are two cities that in many ways people might compare, right? They're in a similar part of the world. They're both relatively cheap, affordable, like cheap to live in. They, are both kind of ex-communist cities. And yeah, so, kind of a logical comparison, and it works for me because I've lived in both of them. So we can kind of have a little bit of a sense and shed some light for you on what each one is like. So let's kind of start by looking at, I think, kind of the pros and the cons of them. So right now I'm in Bulgaria. Why am I in Bulgaria? Well, it's easier to get residency. It's easier for business. It's, I would say, a more convenient city. Okay, so it's easier to get around. It's easier to get things done. It's less bureaucratic. It's things like that. Okay, some of the Bulgarians might be like, less bureaucratic than here, really. Serbia, on the other hand, has the advantage of, I would say, it's a more cosmopolitan city. I've kind of talked about this before in some previous videos. It's a place that, like Belgrade was the center of Yugoslavia, right? And so it's kind of a cultural center for the Serbo-Croatian region. You'll see a lot of music comes out of there. It's kind of the center of art and culture for the area, which is a pretty cool thing, right? It kind of gives you access to that. Some people argue that it's some of the best nightlife in Europe, so that's clearly really good. If you're into that sort of thing, I would say, by far in that sense, there's a bunch going on. Yeah, so that's kind of like a little bit of pros and cons. Now, if you were to compare them geographically, Belgrade is on the river, actually the meeting of a couple rivers, and so that gives it kind of a nice aesthetic, right? From that standpoint, you can kind of walk down by the river, you can see the lights there, reflecting off the water, it's kind of beautiful. Things like this, that's very cool. They don't have anything like that in Bulgaria, but what they have in Bulgaria, in Sofia, is they have a bunch of parks, right? So you have South Park, this quite big park. I mean, there's like a bunch of parks, but South Park is kind of the best known, I would say, park. People are quite active, they're walking their dogs, very nice to see, right? That's kind of a nice thing. And then you're at the base of the mountain, so you have lots of different sports that you can do. People will go dirt biking up the mountain, they'll go hiking, there's skiing nearby during the winter, things like this, right? So I would say if you were to compare these two and you were to say, okay, pros and cons of each, I would say that Belgrade is probably like a little bit more cosmopolitan, like city vibe type place. And Sofia has a little bit more like nature. Oh, that's interesting. Somehow my phone decided to trigger some sort of a voice command. Anyway, so yeah, that would be kind of a little bit of comparison there. In terms of costs, generally I find that Sofia is a little bit cheaper than Belgrade, but not dramatically so. For the most part, they're both pretty inexpensive. Rent is cheap in both places. Food is generally cheap in both places. Taxis are generally cheap. Taxis are a little bit cheaper in Sofia. Food is a little bit cheaper in Sofia. Rent probably goes both ways. I think on the high end, like if you go and check out Belgrade waterfront, the property prices to purchase are probably a bit higher there. So kind of the top end in Belgrade is probably a little bit more expensive than the top end in Sofia, but really kind of similar sort of thing. And this is probably partially due to the fact that there aren't really many, if any, good apartment buildings, in particular apartment building locations in Sofia, whereas there are a few, if you're kind of in Vrača, things like this, or like I said, Belgrade waterfront, kind of those areas that are going to be a little bit more expensive, maybe New Belgrade. So you've got a few of these areas where it's maybe a little bit more pricey, and it's kind of, there's a reason for it. And there isn't as much of a comparison, I would say, in terms of your ability to get apartments in Sofia, right? So that's kind of a bit of a comparison there. Beyond that, what would I say? So I would say that, like I said, for sure, you get much better nightlife. And nightlife is super inexpensive in Serbia. You get kind of a great experience there. So bang for your buck, definitely better. What it offers in Belgrade is much better than what it offers in Sofia in that regard. I would say that people are probably a little bit warmer, a little bit friendlier on the surface anyway in Serbia. The Bulgarian culture tends to be kind of cold on the exterior, but then once you get to know people, they tend to warm up. It's a bit of an odd thing for me coming from Canada, where people are, I would say, kind of known for being polite and friendly. That's not really the vibe that you get at all in Bulgaria. It's more of like, get to know people first, and then you can have that warmth and friendship, that sort of thing. So I feel like it's a little bit better in Serbia in that regard, but again, it's person to person, right? Who it is that you meet. In terms of general conveniences and what you offer, internet is much better in Bulgaria than it is in Serbia. It's really, I find, not particularly good. Referring specifically to cell phone plans here, and in general, cell phone plans in Serbia are really awful because they only work in Serbia, right? So, or at least you end up paying a lot if you start using them outside of Serbia. So in that sense, not as good. Like I said, taxis are slightly more expensive, but they're cheap either way. It doesn't really matter. If you're talking about setting up businesses, far better to be like way more business friendly in Bulgaria than it is in Serbia. Banking is much better. Forming companies is better. Maintenance for bureaucracy, etc., is better. Like all of those things are better in Bulgaria for sure. Taxes are lower in Bulgaria than they are in Serbia. Not dramatically so. Like Serbia's taxes are not insane. Payroll taxes, like socials, those types of contributions tend to be a little bit different. I find if you're kind of hiring people, access to talent, much better in Serbia than Bulgaria. Bulgaria kind of has this disadvantage. It's a pro and a con, right? It's part of the EU, which is great, but what it's meant is that a lot of people have left Bulgaria to go abroad. And so what you'll typically find in terms of, there's just more competition for the people you're hiring. That's basically the bottom line about it. Okay, so you've got that. I would say if you're talking about medical services, the medical system, I would say, is better in Serbia than in Bulgaria. Again, kind of for some similar reasons. I find a lot of the good doctors have left Bulgaria and gone to Germany. So what you're going to be left with is going to depend, right? Not to say that you can't get some good people, but it's just kind of the general average. I would tend to prefer to be using the medical system in Serbia versus Bulgaria, but in general, neither of them are especially good. So you've got that. You've got a very educated populace. I would find that like education in general is promoted more in Serbia, and it's maybe because of the fact that the labor market is worse. So it's highly competitive, and people are kind of pushed into advancing their education. So that's something to be aware of. Yeah. So. Should you go and live in one of them? What does it look like? Well, it's easier to go and live in Bulgaria if you're in a situation where you're more interested in the culture and connecting with people, etc. I think generally speaking, what I hear from people is that they tend to prefer Serbia. A lot of people, are like, hey, they really like the warmth of kind of the Serbian culture, etc. If you're, wanting to do business and, be productive and make money, probably you want to be in Bulgaria. But, to each their own, right? Like I said, there's a lot of outdoor activities. There's a lot going on. Once you get to know people in these places, I find, I'm a really big believer in when you go to a place, you make friends, you connect with locals, etc. And that has a big payoff in terms of the quality of your life that you live. So anyway, and they have a lot of similarities culturally, right? You've got kind of in terms of music, you have turbo folk in Serbia, and then in Bulgaria, you have chalga and what they call, and then they'll refer to the Serbian stuff as turbo chalga, and there's kind of this back and forth. That's a personal preference. I personally a little bit prefer the Serbian music, but hey, to each their own, like I said. And then when you're talking about food, I'm a big food guy. I mean, they have a lot of similarities in terms of the foods that they're going to serve. So, maybe you have something that you like a little bit more here, maybe you like something a little bit more there. I mean, there's restaurants I like in both, and so, either is fine. I would say that if you're somebody who's coming with the intention of getting a job, the job market is much better in Bulgaria. What you're going to get for wages are going to be higher. The wage to costs ratio is better. So just generally like quality of life that you're going to get, input versus output, is going to be better if you're in that situation in Bulgaria than it is in Serbia. If on the other hand, you're, like me and most of our clients, you're, an international business person who is doing business online and it doesn't matter, well, I mean, then the biggest trade-off I think is infrastructure, and Serbia is not good for the infrastructure. So, you again ended up leading there. So just for example, it's hard to get payment processing of any type in Serbia. Standard services like Stripe and TransferWise and things like this, not well supported. PayPal, etc., not well supported in Serbia, whereas they're much better supported in Bulgaria. So anyway, that I hope gives you a little bit of a sense. Please, if you liked the video, click the like button, click the subscribe button. If you guys have some questions, like put them in the chat below. If you have some preference, you're like, hey, listen, I like Serbia more, I like Bulgaria more, I like Belgrade more, I like Sofia more. I, don't like either of those. I like Novi Sad or Varna or whatever. Put it in the chat there. Maybe you like, Bosnia and something like this. Great, let us know. If you have something you'd like us to help you with, please reach out. You can book a call with me. There's a link below, clarity.fm/Michael Rosmer. You can visit our website, offshorecapitalist.com, offshorecitizen.net. And yeah, that hopefully helps you. I will see you guys on the next video.